Welcome to Weird Web Radio, an explorer's guide to hidden worlds of the paranormal and occult, reality-expanding experiences, and the downright weird and bizarre. With your host, Lonnie Scott.
Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Weird Web Radio. Tonight, this afternoon, or however the sun finds you, we've got a great guest in Tim Weisberg. Now, if you're not familiar with Tim's name, I guarantee that you've been influenced or entertained by his work. Tim has been a big part of the paranormal community and entertainment specifically for a lot of years. In fact, if you even had a ghost hunter or a paranormal investigator come around to your place, or you've been to an event, a live haunt investigation, there's a good chance that Tim may have had a hand in training those people. Tim is a writer and a researcher. He's been part of Destination America's Ghost Asylum and Ghost Stalkers. He helped found the Legend Trips in the New England area. Tim's got some books out there, and Tim is also the voice and host of Spooky Southcoast, which is a major paranormal radio show you can hear every Saturday night live that comes out of the New England area. So if you're not familiar with that, I highly advise you to check it out. It's SpookySouthcoast.com. Other than that, we are going to dig into some really cool stuff, go behind the scenes of what goes on in paranormal entertainment, paranormal investigations, and preserving the history of a lot of these places that are involved. So grab your popcorn or whatever it is you like, make yourself a drink, and get ready to go. Enjoy the show, my friends. Welcome to Weird Web Radio. Tonight we've got a pretty special guest. His name is Tim Weisberg. And Tim, why don't you go ahead and tell us where it is that you come from? Where are you?
Physically, where am I? Because I'm still trying to figure out where I am spiritually and mentally in all these years of my life. But,
hey, maybe we can solve some of that before we're done here.
I live in Massachusetts, which I am very lucky in doing paranormal research to live here, because we have, and we can get into this a little bit later on, but I live in the Bridgewater Triangle. So where I live, we have every type of paranormal phenomena you can imagine.
The Bridgewater. What is the Bridgewater Triangle for those of us who don't live in the Northeast?
It is. Imagine if there was an area where every bit of different type of paranormal activity can all take place at the same time, whether it be ghosts and hauntings, UFOs, alien abductions, cryptid creatures like Bigfoot and giant thunderbirds, and also some of the true crime aspects of it. You know, the fact that there's a higher amount of murders in this area, a higher amount of mental illness per capita than anywhere else in New England. You have all of these factors coming together, and it all happens here in an area of, just a couple of 100 square miles. And so that's the Bridgewater Triangle. It's basically, if you look at a map of Massachusetts, it covers from just south of Boston down into Rhode Island over toward Cape Cod.
Nice. So you're sort of in the X-Files live.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, that's a great way to put it, because we get reports of everything here. And what's great about it, too, is that in living in an area like this where there's so many different types of phenomena taking place, if you catalog it all, you can start to see the connections and start to figure out the threads between them. So not only do you get to say, oh, I've had all these weird experiences, but you can really start to figure out why you have.
That's true. Were you born and raised in that area?
I was, yeah. I was born in Boston, and I've lived pretty much on the southeastern part of Massachusetts my entire life. And right now, I live pretty much at the beginning of Cape Cod. And so that's why when we started my radio show, Spooky Southcoast, we called it Spooky Southcoast because that's where we live, on the south coast of Massachusetts. And it's funny because, we never realized that with podcasting and the internet, people would listen to us all over the world. And it's amazing how many different places they think that we actually are living in when they're like, oh, South Coast California, South Coast Georgia, South Coast Ukraine. No, but it's definitely... It's a place that has my heart. I mean, I like to travel. I like to see different parts of the country, but I don't think I'd ever want to live anywhere else.
Yeah, I've only had the opportunity to get up into your area once. I took what I've considered the mandatory road trip up to Salem, Massachusetts, probably close to 10 or 11 years ago now. And I had a really good time up there. Got to visit Boston for a little bit. I could see why people would be drawn to the area and why it would be nice to be in the area, especially if you're into the paranormal and the occult. There's plenty of it to be found.
And I just had the opportunity a few months ago to visit the Bermuda Triangle for the first time. And I can tell you, it's nice. Bermuda's nice, and the ocean's beautiful and everything, but their triangle has nothing on our triangle.
Well, I guess all sort of falls back on what the weather is.
Yeah, well, that's true.
So, I guess you're living in a ripe area to be interested in the paranormal, but when was it and how was it that you got into the paranormal? Was there a specific event? Was it a certain person that taught you or tugged you into it?
I think that I always kind of had experiences when I was younger. I remember like laying in my crib as a baby. I don't want to say like an infant, but I was probably, around a little over a year old. And I remember laying there and seeing hands, forming on the wall over my bed and not being able to figure out why it was happening and having all kinds of strange experiences from a very young age. So I think I was kind of thrown into it by experience, but it wasn't until I was probably maybe 7 or 8 that I found a Time Life Mysteries of the Unknown book in my grandmother's house that my uncle had ordered, when they used to give you the first book free. So he had the first book of like every Time Life series. And so I had the Mysteries of the Unknown, and I started reading it, and I said, wow, people actually have real experiences with this. And meanwhile, in the other room of my grandmother's house, my mother and my aunts and my grandmother are all talking about the ghost that lived in their house. And if I entered the room, they'd all clam up really fast and not talk about it. But I was definitely in an environment where it kind of fostered at least a belief in all of this. So growing up, I was always the kid that hung out in the 100 section of the library in the Dewey Decimal System. Everybody knows that's where the paranormal stuff was. And I always kept it a secret for years and years and years. And it wasn't until this paranormal boom that we're in right now, since 2004, where I was really comfortable talking about it, not only with my friends, but talking about it with the public.
Okay, so you, even being in that area where the paranormal is sort of well known in a lot of ways, talking about the triangle where so many events take place, you felt like growing up you still had to hide it from others?
I did, because, even though you realize that there is this whole world of it out there, there's still that stigma, or at least there was when I was growing up, there's still that stigma of people might think you're weird for believing this, and people might think you're weird for saying that you've had these experiences, and they might not believe you. And so I was always very conscious of that. I did have a couple of friends in high school that I got very comfortable talking about it, and we would talk about it in theoretical terms. I would never actually say that I had an experience. I would just say, well, what if ghosts were real? What could they be? What if there are creatures coming from another planet? How do they get here? We would have these discussions, and it became very philosophical in nature. And so I was able to kind of get away with that. It wasn't until, all of a sudden, and even when I first started doing Spooky Southcoast in 2006, I still wouldn't go out and talk about it with people. I kind of just kept it reserved just for Saturday nights. But then I realized that the more I went places, I would just stop at a yard sale on my way home from, work. And somebody would tell me, oh, hey, that item you're holding, there's a rumor that it's haunted. And I started to get kind of drawn into other people sharing their experiences with me without me even initiating the conversation. And that's kind of when I realized, okay, I have to just start talking about this stuff with everybody because it's what I'm meant to do.
Yeah, we're kindred spirits in that light. I can't seem to go anywhere without somebody I don't know if even before I came out publicly in my paganism or my explorations of the occult or my own paranormal adventures like you, I must have put off some vibe that said, this guy will listen to your ghost story.
I think that's what happens. I think that we give off a certain, they say that people who are more, without trying to get too woo-woo about it, but when you have your third eye opened, when you're working on this higher frequency. My best friend's a psychic medium and a Reiki master, so she tells me all this stuff. So I'm just regurgitating what she told me. But she tells you that, when you get yourself up into that level, then other people that are around you are kind of drawn up into that level as well. So I think that when we're going out there and we're encountering people and just going about our day-to-day lives, we might be kind of opening up their third eye a little bit around them just by proximity.
Yeah, it could be. It's just we all give off a kind of vibration, and we do tend to attract our own tribes in a lot of ways.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So when did you break from philosophical conversations of the paranormal into maybe chasing down practical experiences? Did you pursue those on your own?
Originally, when we first started doing the radio show, see, the way that it worked for me was I was working as a sports writer, and that led to, and one of the things that I wrote about was pro wrestling, because at the time, pro wrestling was huge. So I had a weekly column on pro wrestling in the newspaper, and that's where I got a lot of recognition. And so the local radio station was starting up a sports talk show, and they said, we'd like to have you call in and do a wrestling report every week. And I said, well, I've always wanted to do radio. Can I come into the station? And so that little 5-minute wrestling report led to me being a co-host of the sports show. And then the program director called me one day and said, we really like what you do. We'd like to give you the chance to do another show if there's something that you want to talk about. And I said, well, I'd love to talk about the paranormal. And they said, you mean ghosts and stuff like that? I said, yeah, absolutely. And they said, well, when do you want to do it? I said, well, the only time I have open on my schedule is Saturday nights from 10 to midnight. And they said, okay, yeah, that's perfect, because that's, radio graveyard time where they were just rerunning stuff from during the week. And so to have fresh content on Saturday nights at 10 o'clock was great for them. And so that was 11 and a half years ago now. And we've been going in there and talking about it every week since. But I realized that when I first went in there that I couldn't expect people to call up, whether it be guests or listeners or what have you. I couldn't expect them to call up and share their experiences with me if I wasn't going to be open and share my experiences with them. So I started talking a little bit about, what had happened with me when I was younger, and, the stories that my family would tell. And that led to finding out about all these different haunted places around where we do the show. And we were about 3 months into doing the show, and a friend of ours named Matt Moniz came aboard. Long story short, we knew him as the sound guy that operated the soundboard for the bands at the biker bar in our town. And that's how we knew him. We would hang out with him there and have a few beers and listen to bands. We had no idea that he'd been spending the last 25 years of his life going into haunted houses, and especially working with UFO abductees. And so he said to us, I'll help you guys out however I can. We brought him in as a co-host, and he told us right from the beginning of him joining the show, you're not going to sit here and armchair quarterback the paranormal. You're not going to sit here and talk about it. You're going to get out there and you're going to experience it. And so he got us going on investigations, and then that led to doing events and all kinds of things. So now, I feel like, as he says, for every step that you take toward the paranormal, it takes 2 steps toward you. And now I feel like I'm surrounded.
That's a good way to put it. Sort of a play on words. I think it was Crowley who said, when you look into the abyss, it looks back, or maybe he regurgitated it from Nietzsche or someone.
Right. And it's all true. It's all true.
Oh, it's absolutely true. And I like how you point out that if you're going to get involved in this stuff, that you have to sort of be willing to share your own stories. I don't know if that's just the way of saying, hey, I'm a safe space, or if it's just, I don't know, being willing to show that you get it. You've been there. You've been through the trenches, and you understand this emotional high and this self-doubt that could come afterwards, and the excitement that leads up to the next one. And it brings the stories out of other people. I like that.
Well, when we originally started doing the show, like I said, it was 2006. So it was really hard to get people to open up and share their own experiences. They were still kind of closeted about it, just as I was. And it's changed over the years with the proliferation of paranormal media and the fact that there's, now there's conventions and there's get-togethers and there's TV shows and all kinds of things where people can feel comfortable talking about this stuff. So I think in the beginning it was very cathartic for people, but also at the same time, they had to kind of gauge our level of how much we would be willing to accept. So it's like, if you hear us tell a story about what happened to us, then okay, well, my story is pretty similar to that. I can share it, as opposed to, not wanting to sound like telling a story where it's too out there and being afraid that somebody wouldn't believe you. That's what we always say on our show, is we always say, we believe you because, we weren't there. It's your experience. All we're here to do is to give you a friendly ear to hear it.
What do you think it was that brought about that change? You said this was back in 2006, and you're going about your own business and you're doing your thing. You're starting this new radio show, and people are still kind of reluctant to share their story. But I mean, you're right. That's not true at all today, but something had to change along the way. What do you think it was?
I think that there's a consciousness shift, really. I think that's what happened. It's something that happened to mankind overall. And if you look at it through the years, there's always been these ebbs and flows of paranormal, we'll call it attention being paid to the paranormal. And if you go back and look through time, whenever there's been great tragedy, it's been followed by a great time afterwards of spiritual awakening. And the biggest one, of course, was after the Civil War. And during the Civil War, we had the age of spiritualism, and that leaving such a huge mark on people. And then, of course, the hoaxing stuff and all that came about later, but it never really went away after that paranormal interest. It was always bubbling below the surface. And I think that 2004, when Ghost Hunters came to TV, it was the right time because America was in a little bit of a spiritual awakening after 9/11, where it's kind of opened us up a little bit more. And I think that we were kind of coming out of that spiritual phase. I thought paranormal was waning over the last couple of years, but just taking a look at the world geopolitically, I think people are looking now to believe in something spiritual with all the stuff that's going on in the world. So I think we're in a point now where the factors around us are just right for us to want to believe that there's something out there.
I think you're right. There seems to be a cultural shift going on right now where people are leaving more traditional ideas of religion. They're clinging to spiritual ideas. It's almost a cultural phenomenon to have ghost stories. I spoke about this with a prior guest. His name's Matt Swain. He's a folklorist at Penn State. And, he talked about it being like this very part of the very fabric of our culture, that you have ghost stories and things of that nature all over, and wherever you go, you're going to find them. They never seem to go away despite whatever the cultural norms are. But there's also this real heavy blend of a materialistic mindset that I think that we're combating as well. And it shows up in the paranormal too. I mean, you have so many hunters that go out there and investigators who are leaning completely on K2 meters and cameras and technology to find their evidence. And do you feel like there's a disconnect between personal experience and the history and these tools?
I think what we're experiencing, because it's funny because I'm lecturing on this weekend at Ocean State Paracon, talking about, I have a presentation that I do called From Fox Sisters to Ghost Brothers, how modern day paranormal research is just modern day spiritualism. And I think that all we've done is we found new ways to have the same experiences and collect the same data. And I think that we're still after the same conclusion one way or another. I used to think that when I got involved with this, that I was going to be the one that would find the one piece of evidence that nobody could refute. I was going to prove to the world that ghosts exist, and whether I had to go out and buy a $10,000 camera system to do it or what have you, I was determined to be the one to try and figure it out. And now I've realized that it's not about that. It's not about ever making anybody believe just based on something that you can show them or tell them. It's about getting people to have an experience. And the only way they can have that experience is to be open to the possibility of that experience. So no matter what I'm doing and no matter how I'm researching it, my goal is always to create that little bit of enlightenment.
I would love to hear that presentation. That's an interesting way that you put it together. It's not the first time I've heard it suggested that modern investigation is really just another method that's evolved directly from spiritualism.
But that's the problem is it's that stigma that spiritualism has attached to it because of the hoaxing that happened and because of the chicanery that happened, and the fact that Houdini was able to disprove some of the spiritualists, not all of them, but some of them. And so that's enough for people to say, well, spiritualism was all a lot of bunk. But it's not. That many people couldn't have had experiences for that long and had it have all been a hoax. There's no way that at one point there was 50 million spiritualists around the world. There's no way that there was 50 million people that were all falling for a hoax.
I agree. I think there's something that had to be moving behind that. But once all the lights kept going off and, like you said, the hoaxes and the things, it left this real ugly stigma attached to spiritualism as it went forward. But there's been some very interesting characters that came out of that field that I wouldn't necessarily call spiritualists, but they were certainly early innovators of what became modern investigations. You used to have guys using compasses instead of what we use today, K2 meters and things, just to see if there's an energy field that would move the point. You went from the seance room to gathering EVP evidence. So again, I really would like to hear your presentation. I'd like to see the dots that you connect and how you present it.
It's funny that you mentioned, using a compass, because that's one of the things that I have a problem with is when people say that the human body and people as a whole, like I used to be against mediums. I used to be against psychics. I used to think that it was all, just something that people did for money or for attention, until I actually started working with mediums and psychics and realized that, okay, there is something to this. I don't understand it, but there's something to it. Not everybody has it, but everybody could have it. And so I hear people say that you can't, use a person to be a determining factor of paranormal evidence. But at the same time, we say you can use an EMF detector, you can use a compass, you can show that there are these physical fluctuations that prove that there's something anomalous there. Well, what about people that we say, oh, he has an unwavering natural sense of direction? Well, that just makes him a human compass, and so that just means that he can just be as prone to these fluctuations and anomalies as one of these devices can be. So I think that the problem is, and I'm friends with Jason Hawes, so I give him crap about this all the time. Whenever I talk to him, I say, you've ruined people's opinions because of the way that you approach ghost hunters in saying, we don't take personal accounts into play. We only want to take into account what we can prove and show on our devices. And I said, you've basically taken people out of the paranormal experience, and that's ruining the paranormal experience for people.
That's an excellent way to put it. I mean, Greg and Dana recently said, that, blinky lights look really good on TV and they're fun to play with and they're cool. They're not the whole show. And I was talking to another friend of mine about this kind of thing recently, and he suggested, he goes, like when you go into a place that's supposed to be haunted or you're having some sort of paranormal experience, it's like your consciousness is experiencing this like it's real sensory input. So you have this notion that you can measure it with a physical device, but in reality, what might be happening to you is more akin to clairaudience or clairvoyance.
And even that is, I think, we're putting titles on something that should be part of the natural human experience. So I feel like we're supposed to be able to be on this higher level of consciousness, and that we've just limited ourselves with our stupid rationalities. From when we get into the age of enlightenment and all of a sudden we start to realize, oh, the world is scientific around us and we can prove all this, that narrowed our scope so much. And just on a smaller scale, when kids are hearing noises in the dark and they think there's somebody in their room and their parents say there's no such thing, that right there is the barrier. That's what throws up the wall that makes us not be able to perceive this stuff anymore. And that some people never had that barrier thrown up for them. Some people never had that limitation in their mentality, and so they're always going to be more open to this. And I think that we need to, as a species, kind of push away all of those blocks and start to realize, as much as we understand everything that we think that we understand in the universe, we still have to step back and look at the universe as a whole and say, holy crap, the fact that all this is happening and does work so perfectly has to mean something.
Yes, absolutely. This is a good point to remind people, for everything that we know scientifically, it's hard to, or I should say it's easy to forget that we have no scientific reason or evidence at all to why we have consciousness, why we're even aware. And as long as that mystery sits out there, I don't think you can have these firm opinions on what it is we're experiencing to begin with.
Yeah, and that's the biggest problem that I have with people, especially, they call themselves skeptics, but in actuality, they're cynics. They're never going to believe anything, and you're never going to change their mind. But the biggest problem I have with people who are like, well, I'm a skeptical believer. I like to approach everything with skepticism. No, you don't approach it with skepticism. You approach it with common sense. You know that there's certain things that you're going to be able to say, okay, that's not a ghost that's making that door move. It's a change in air pressure because there's a fan across the room. Those are the kind of things that are just common sense when you sit down and actually figure them out. So I think that we try to put all these qualifiers on our experiences to try to make it look like we're not falling for anything. But what's the saying? If you stand for nothing, you'll fall for anything. And I think it kind of works in the background too. If you're not willing to fall for some things, you'll never experience anything.
No, I agree. Yeah, you've got to be willing to fail. You've got to be willing to look like a fool, because that's how you take those chances.
It happens to me all the time on investigations. I'll get so, especially because we do a lot of events. I'm part of Legend Trips with Jeff Belanger, and we run our own events with Spooky Southcoast. And so I'm always bringing people into haunted places, and we're always in a mindset of it's a little bit different than being on a regular investigation. When you're doing an event with a bunch of people, they want to have an experience. So you're really hoping that something paranormal will take place. And you have to be aware of confirmation bias and the fact that, every little thing you're hoping is a ghost experience, even if it isn't. So we'll have something go on, and I'll get wrapped up in the moment, and I'll get excited, but that doesn't mean that I'm not going to try to look around and figure out exactly what it is. And some investigators just say, well, I'm not going to get excited until I can completely eliminate every possible cause. But I look at it as I'm going to get excited first, because that's going to make me look around and really want to disprove this, because if I'm not already emotionally invested and engaged in what's happening, then I'm not going to care as much about whether or not I can prove that it's true.
Now, when you have these events, how much do you balance giving your guests or your audience the history of the location you're going towards versus allowing them to experience it for a new, fresh first time?
I'm going to let you in on a little bit of a secret in how we run events. The ghost part is all just a gimmick to get them to come in and learn the history. That's what we do these events for. We've been doing these now for the last 8 years, and the whole purpose of it is to raise money for historical places. We've raised over $30,000 so far for different historical places. And Jeff and I talked for quite a while before this, Jeff Belanger and I, because we had both done other people's events where you show up and there's cast members from TV shows and you get to hang out with them and get an autograph and investigate. And people are in these really awesome historic places and they're completely overlooking that because they're so hung up on who they're hanging out with. So we created Legend Trips with the idea of let's make these historical places the star. Let's make that the big deal about these events, is that you get to go to this place that maybe you don't have access to normally, or we get you different access than you'd ever possibly have. And we do give people the entire history when we bring them there, because we feel like that's an important part of the investigation. You never want it to be leading, but at the same time, you also don't want people to be going in blind, because that history is such an important factor of what goes on. And so whenever we do an event, it's always, somebody from the historical society or the property owner or somebody takes the folks on a tour so that they can get the full sense of the history before we start breaking things down and actually looking for the ghosts.
Oh, that's awesome. The history that you uncover throughout investigations is usually my favorite, and very often is the only evidence you come up with whenever you go out on these trips. If you've been raising money to help restore these historical places, what's your favorite location?
That's a tough question, because I've become very familiar with the Lizzie Borden house in Fall River, Massachusetts. It's 20 minutes from where I live. Leanne, the owner, has given us our own key to the place over the years. I mean, we've done so many events there. I probably investigated it, a couple dozen times. So I have a great, strong connection with that location. But at the same time, one of my absolute favorite places is the Houghton Mansion in North Adams, Massachusetts, which is now for sale. So there's, questions about whether or not people will be able to continue investigating there. That's a place where I had an amazing experience with shadow people, including shaking hands with one. And then the Victorian Mansion, the S.K. Pierce Mansion in Gardner, Massachusetts. It's the only time that I've ever been somewhere where I felt like I was in a horror movie. It's just amazing, some of the experiences that I've had in just some of the local New England spots.
How do you shake hands with a shadow person? You don't get to just make that comment and not give the story.
Well, we were investigating in this area. See, for anybody that's not familiar with the story of the Houghton Mansion, it's been on all the TV shows, Ghost Adventures, Ghost Hunters. They've all focused on this place. And it's a mansion that was built by the first mayor of the town of North Adams. And he was also a Mason. So when he died, and there's a whole accident that's associated with the tragedy of the Houghton family. But when he died, he left the mansion to the Masonic Brotherhood of the town, and they built a Masonic lodge like in the middle of this mansion. So it's already this huge mansion, and then you happen to walk through this door, and there's a gigantic Masonic hall. And in the very back of that is a secret area where they used to hold ritualistic ceremonies. And then over that is another area on the second floor. So we're way up in this second floor area, far away from everybody. And we're investigating there throughout the night, and we're seeing these shadow people walk by. And they're walking by. We're looking down a long hallway, and they're at the other end of the hallway walking from one side to the other. So it's like we're watching them walk across this hallway opening. And we start trying to coax them to come down the long hallway. And at one point, we had a procession of shadow people walk down the hallway with people, living people on either side, investigators on either side of the hallway. These shadow figures paraded right between us. And when I asked the girl that was standing across from me, "Are you seeing this?" the shadow person actually turned and looked at me and kept walking. So we realized that we're having some pretty amazing experiences already with these shadow people. And at the very end of the night, there's one shadow figure standing back all by himself. We coax him to come all the way down the hallway and to stand right in front of us, and he does. And this is an amazing thing to see this three-dimensional shadow being standing right before you. And I held out my hand with a closed fist, and I said, "Can you give me a fist bump?" Figuring that's like the most easiest way to make a physical connection. And the guy that I was investigating with, Frank, elbows me and says, "You idiot. What if he's from the 1800s or something? He doesn't know what a fist bump is. Shake his hand like a man." So I held out my hand and I said, "Will you shake my hand?" And this shadow person's hand wrapped itself around my hand and began pumping my arm up and down. It was incredible. I'm not afraid to admit I started crying when that happened.
Well, that's amazing.
It was.
What sort of physical sensation comes along with shaking hands with a shadow person?
It literally felt like I was just shaking hands with another person, but I had completely gone limp. You know, instead of trying to give somebody a firm handshake, I went limp, and I was kind of letting it see how much power it would have to move my arm up and down, and it shook my hand pretty vigorously. So I was very impressed with the way that it took place, and also with the way that it happened for somebody else in the room. Frank, the guy that was next to me, he had the same thing happen. And everybody else that was in the room saw it all take place. So I know it wasn't something that was just in my mind.
The only thing that would make that story better is if they gave you the secret Mason's handshake or something.
I see. If I had known it, my thing is always when I investigate, I love to do shave and a haircut. So I'll do, shave and a haircut, and then I want the ghost to come back and go 2 bits. And we were doing that all throughout the entire night in that area, and we were getting the response knocks. And we always said, "Gee, if only there was a secret knock that we knew of the and we had Masons there. It was the Masons that were running it with us, but nobody knew any kind of secret knock to try to get them to do."
That's too bad. That could have produced even cooler results. Now, I'm just curious, since it's come up with shadow people, you hear a lot of different theories about what they might be. What do you think shadow people are?
Gee. I think that there's different degrees of them. I do agree with the sense that, and Heidi Hollis has done, the foremost research on shadow figures, and she tells you that they are extraterrestrial beings. There's other people that have researched them and tell you that they are demonic creatures. And then there's other people that tell you that they're just ghosts that don't have the ability to fully manifest a physical form. I think that it's actually D, all of the above. And I think that some of these beings probably are just some sort of spirit of a formerly living person. And I think some of them are actually very bad negative things. The one that I encountered in the basement of Lizzie Borden's, I'm convinced anyway, that there's a negative entity, probably something elemental, that lives on that property, that even predates that house being built, predates the Borden murders, predates everything, and that this figure is the physical representation of that. So I've experienced ones that I think are just regular ghosts, and I've experienced ones that I think are, what people might call demonic beings.
Okay. Yeah, I agree. I always like to get people's thoughts and opinions on what they're encountering, but I like your idea and your approach. I'm in agreement that, I don't think it's an either or case most of the time. I think it's and.
Right.
You went back and we were talking about the the rise in paranormal success, I guess, or interest into the paranormal. And I think some of that probably had to do with shows like Ghost Hunters. What do you think? I mean, what do you think the rise of paranormal television credits its success to?
Well, I think that the biggest reason why paranormal television is so successful is because people watch it, and it's cheap to make. So I think those two things are what ends up happening. What ends up going on in television is that if something comes along that becomes a hit, and people look at that and say, we need to find our own version of it. But what ended up happening is as these networks are looking for ways to put more paranormal television on TV, you're also getting people that are realizing we have more opportunities to get our perspective out, to get our point of view, to get our way of researching out. And so the inadvertent byproduct of TV just trying to get some people to watch television is that they've been able to expand the paranormal research world. And so I think that helped. I think it also helped that you're seeing everyday people that are doing it, so everyday people are feeling like it's something that they can do. So that's kind of really helped with the proliferation of doing it as well. If you talk to anybody that's been in the paranormal for a long time, they'll tell you, when I was doing this, there was maybe 5 or 6 people across the country that I could call or send a letter to via snail mail. And now there's, 1 million paranormal investigators on Facebook that you just type in, paranormal research and you get 100 listings of people just in your own town. So that's kind of been what's led that explosion, is the fact that it's popular. People like it. People are willing to talk about it. TV's willing to keep putting it on. And the other part of it, too, is that people feel like, hey, if they can do it, I can do it. And that's why it works so well. Because if you think about it, what other reality show out there or even dramatic shows can you watch where you can say, I think I'll do that? Like, you don't watch ER and feel like you can all of a sudden, do a heart operation. But you can watch Ghost Hunters and say, there's this haunted place in my town, this abandoned factory in my town. I can go in there with a flashlight and an EMF detector. And so there you go. It's very accessible.
That's true. Now, you have your own history and involvement with paranormal television. What is it?
It's funny because doing what I do is, just talking to people and collecting paranormal stories, it led to me kind of being somebody that people would lean on for when they're looking for different locations. So I would have TV shows that would contact me and say, can you help us find witnesses for this place? Can you suggest to us a place here? And I was always willing to help out, and I never really thought it was anything that I could do for a career. And I would get calls to be on. I'm proud to say, I hate to brag, but I was on the lowest rated episode of Monster Quest in the history of the Sci-Fi Channel.
Congratulations.
Thank you. I was on the one where they actually focus on ghosts, and all the cryptid people were like, what the heck? We don't want to know anything about ghosts. Bring us more monsters. But, that was the Lizzie Borden episode. And because I work so much with Lizzie Borden's, whenever there's a TV show filming, I always get called over there to do stuff. So it was going on Ghost Adventures and talking about my experience on Ghost Adventures. I was able to meet Nick Groff, and we just had a little conversation of, hey, you live in New England, I live in New England, let's hook up sometime and do some stuff together and go on some investigations. And when Nick left Ghost Adventures and decided to start doing the show Ghost Stalkers, he was looking for a researcher, and he remembered that I was close by in New England and that I had, a pretty good Rolodex of people that had experiences in haunted places. So he reached out to me and asked me if I'd be interested in taking that gig, and I said, yeah, and we put together what I think are 6 great episodes. We were probably ahead of our time a little bit, but that led to me getting picked up to work on Ghost Asylum, and I did 3 seasons of Ghost Asylum as a researcher and a producer, and now we have this new show that's coming up in August that's going to be hopefully a game changer for paranormal research, because I think we're going to finally be able to stop moving, and this is something that we tried to do with Ghost Stalkers, but like I said, we were ahead of our time. Start moving away from, is this place haunted, to let's figure out why this place is haunted and what it all means. And that's what's getting me really excited, because that's where paranormal television and paranormal research needs to go.
Oh, I like that twist. So, I mean, how much of that process can you tell us?
Well, the idea of this new show is it's the same cast from Ghost Asylum. It's the Tennessee Wraith Chasers. And instead of, they caught a lot of flack with Ghost Asylum for trying to catch ghosts. That a lot of people said there's no way that you can catch a ghost and contain it. So they did catch some flack for that. But I give them credit for trying. And certainly they tried to come up with some innovative ideas in doing that. But they said, why are we going into these places and trying to take the ghosts out of them when the ghosts are what's actually giving these places their character? And what happened is we started to realize it's not just an abandoned hospital or an old asylum or an old jail that's getting character from the ghosts. It's the fact that there's entire towns that have this character around them. So we started looking at where are some of these hotspot towns where multiple locations are haunted, but there seems to be common threads among the hauntings. So that was the goal with this project, is to go out there and find these places. And we were able to zero in on quite a few towns, and we were able to find different haunted locations to try to see if we can actually start seeing the forest for the trees, and no longer just have to say, is this place haunted, but just be able to say, yep, we know it's haunted, but let's figure out what that haunting means, and let's figure out if that haunting, if is the town causing the haunting, or does the haunting cause the town, if you get what I'm saying. So that's kind of what the purpose of this was, and I can tell you from just the little bit that I know of what's coming down the pike, it's going to be amazing.
Well, I'm looking forward to that. Now, are you traveling with the show?
I did not, but I worked as an associate producer, so my job was helping to find the haunted locations and to find these towns and to try and figure out, some ideas of what we think could be going on and how to best attack that investigation. And so I didn't have the chance to actually go around with them. I have just started a new day job. I got the offer, and I was like, all the seasons that I've done of TV, nobody's ever offered to let me go out on the road. And now you're offering to let me go out on the road right after I started a brand new day job. Like 3 weeks before. So I said I have to turn it down. But I did get the chance to go when they were filming in a couple of spots in New England. I got to go and actually hang out, and actually you probably will see me in one of the episodes on screen too. So it was great to be able to actually get to see the process of how the guys work, and also to see the way that the towns were accepting the way that they were coming into their towns and putting together these investigations.
Oh, cool. I'm really looking forward to that project. It sounds like it's at least taking a different angle and a spin on all these.
You have to, though. I mean, everybody...
Right. It's sort of the next evolution of paranormal TV.
And that's the thing is... certain shows like Ghost Hunters lasted a long time, Ghost Adventures has lasted a long time. They have a very specific style that works and that's successful, but not everybody can come into this and have right out of the gate a successful style. And I think that there can be some trial and error in things, and I think that a lot of these paranormal shows that have come and gone are still stepping stones to getting to where we need to be. They might not be just right, but they're getting us closer. And that's why I always look at Ghost Stalkers as being like a paradigm shift, because that's when we started to say, we know these places are haunted. What does it mean? And I think that if that is what paranormal TV is going to start depicting, then I think maybe the paranormal groups that are out there can start really putting their heads together on that. And that's where the key will come, because no TV show is going to be able to advance the field on its own, but if the field can respond to what a TV show is doing, then that's going to start to make things change.
Oh, sure. For good or ill, I think the TV shows influence, if not current investigators who are sort of, like they've got their ways and they know what they like to do, it's going to influence the next round of investigators who are picking it up for the first time. So at any point that these shows go on TV, I'm sure somewhere in someone's mind is handling the show has got to be aware of that.
Yeah, and I think what'll end up being the end result is eventually all these shows will go off the air. We may reach a point. I don't think it'll ever happen because of just the interest level. but we may reach a point where there's no paranormal investigation show on anymore. We might still have the recreation shows like Paranormal Witness and things like that, but we might not. We might reach a point where there's nobody actually actively investigating on television, and I think that will actually also cause a shift in the paranormal field itself, because people will no longer be copying what they see, and they'll have to figure things out on their own, and there will be more innovation, so that when the next wave of paranormal investigation shows come, people will be doing things completely different.
Yeah, that'd be a sad day, though. I mean, I subscribe to the PlayStation View simply so I'll have Destination America so I can watch all the investigation shows.
But the thing about that, though, is the shows will still be there. They'll just be a different way of doing it. And I think we are going to reach a point where, right now, TV producers and networks, they love to see the colored lights and the flashing and the beeping and all that stuff. But we might reach a point where it's okay to say, let's see what happens when we just throw somebody in a dark room on their own.
Yeah,
there's been a few shows that have done it, but I think that's really where the true experience is. And if you want paranormal stuff to be scary, which that's why they do it, because it gets that kind of reaction out of the viewer, I understand that aspect of it, but I also wonder, how would these shows look if we didn't worry about scaring people and we just kind of looked at it as being this strange part of life that we just don't understand. And I think that would be a big shift as well, because I actually did a lecture last year at Ocean State Paracon where I talked about how it's okay to be afraid, that fear actually can help you in a paranormal investigation. And I got so much grief from the investigators in the crowd. I was like, okay, fine. I understand where you're coming from, but, also understand that it works both ways,
Right. There's a lot of accusation towards paranormal TV that evidence is faked, and people leave shows and they start saying, oh, well, here's a little inside scoop that you guys didn't know. Here's the truth. How much of that should fans really be listening to?
Well, I mean, first of all, at the very forefront, and I know it's going to sound like I'm covering up something when I say this, paranormal television shows are entertainment. They are not scientific research. They are not proof of what goes on. I would not assume that every, rich socialite is a Kardashian based on watching the Kardashian show. So you can't assume that every paranormal investigator is Zach Bagans because of the way that Zach acts on investigations. So that has to be put out there at the forefront. It's for entertainment purposes only. That being said, every show that I've ever worked with and people that I know that have worked on the shows, and I know pretty much everybody because most of them come from New England, that looking at their approaches is they will always tell you, the investigations were 100% legitimate. Now, does that mean that TV doesn't put some dramatic emphasis on things? Sure. They're going to play some creepy music in the background. They're going to do these hard cuts to make it look like when somebody says, what was that? And they're going to cut it off right there because it's better if people think over the course of the next 3-minute commercial, what is it that they found? And then when you come back on the other side, like, oh, it's just a raccoon outside the window. Those are just the little tricks that they play to create dramatic tension. That's going to happen. And no paranormal investigator, with the exception of Ghost Adventures, at least from what I understand, the way that the show was put together, has the opportunity to edit their own show. They go out, they film, and then there's editors who are very good at their jobs, who are paid to edit television shows in a way that is presentable for TV. So that's always going to happen. And you can't hold the investigators responsible for what the end product is in that regard. That being said, all of these accusations of fakery that are out there, I think a lot of them stem from jealousy. And I think a lot of them stem from the fact that that's the problem of having a TV show, a TV genre where everybody that watches feels like it's something that they can do, is that everybody that's watching feels like it's something that they should be doing. So there's a lot of jealousy as to, well, why does this guy get to be on TV and not me? And that's where I think a lot of these accusations come from, too.
I agree. There's just going to be that kind of thing no matter what it is that we cover. But I figure with your experience and your connections in the field, if anybody can put some of those concerns to rest, it should be you.
I mean, if you think about it, and I know that, see, we don't call it reality TV, we call it unscripted TV. Because we understand going into it that it's never actually going to be real. If it was 100% real, we'd be watching 8 hours of nothing happening in the dark. But instead we're getting the best 44 minutes of a 3-day investigation. So that alone kind of takes it out of the 100% real category. So as long as you're willing to kind of go down that road and understand that, then I think you can still enjoy the shows, even if you're skeptical of the process of how they're created. The other thing that people need to realize, paranormal researchers need to realize, TV networks are not making shows for you. They are making shows for the regular viewer that's watching TV. That's why you already know what an EVP is. But when you watch Ghost Hunters, Jason Hawes is going to explain to you 45 times a season what an EVP is. Because the show isn't made for you. The show is made for people who aren't doing this and have an interest in it. They do take into account how the paranormal field will react to shows. We've had those discussions. We've had, that's something that I've talked about with other writers and producers. But in the end, that's a very small segment of the viewing audience. So that's like saying that, when they made ER, they were really worried about how doctors were going to feel about ER and try to make it, specifically for doctors. If you do that, you're hurting yourself because, you want it to appeal to a mass audience. And you also want to, not be beholden to what paranormal researchers are too, because then it's just going to go over everybody else's head.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, if it's all technical jargon, you never explain. Nobody's going to know what you're talking about. If it's made into too many layman's terms and you're constantly explaining all the time, then you lose another segment of your crowd. It's probably a pretty good tight wire act you have to walk to put these shows together. With all that said, even whether it's TV or not, just the world of paranormal in general, what's a controversial topic that comes to your mind that really kind of sticks out?
Ouija boards. I say that looking at a stack of them on my desk right in front of me.
Why Ouija boards?
I have never dealt with more controversy over anything besides the Ouija board because there's that stigma attached to them that they are gateways into hell. And I try to tell people this, and they don't listen to me, but a Ouija board is no different than a digital recorder. It's no different than a K2 meter. It's no different than walking into a dark room and asking questions out loud. It's just a tool used to communicate with something that we can't see or hear. That's all that it is. But the problem is, see, the Ouija board history is fascinating, and my buddy Bob Murch can tell it way better than I can. But the short, brief version of it is, back in the old days, all right, we can go far back into ancient times when they had scrying and they had talking boards and all that. But aside from all that, from the beginning of the Ouija board's existence with William Fuld and the late 1800s, it was a game. It was a parlor game. It was designed as in the Victorian age, it was wrong for a boy and a girl that were dating, that weren't married, to sit close to each other on a couch, to hold hands. This was frowned upon. This is not something that you did in polite society. But you pull out the Ouija board, you put it on the little tiny table. The boy and the girl sit across from each other at this little tiny table. Their knees are touching underneath. Their hands are touching on the planchette. All of a sudden, they're able to get real nice and cozy playing around with this Ouija board. It was basically the Tinder of its day. So with the Ouija board, every house had it because this is what they used it for. And it was just something you'd pull out for fun during parties or, when you wanted to spend some private time with somebody that you were interested in. It wasn't until The Exorcist comes out in the 1970s where Captain Howdy is communicating with Regan through the board and then all hell breaks loose. Now all of a sudden the Ouija board is the tool of the devil. So before that, it had this nice history to it that all goes to hell, no pun intended, because of The Exorcist. And now every time I pull one out at one of my lectures, I hear half the audience scream, "Oh no, I don't want anything to do with that. I'm leaving unless you put that away."
Oh boy. Yeah, I like that you point out that it's no different than a digital recorder or a K2 meter or anything else. I think a digital recorder is the perfect comparison because, a Ouija board is trying to communicate with unseen forces. and yet it's demonic. But if you grab a digital recorder and walk into an empty room and start asking questions, nobody bats an eyebrow.
Right. And people, the counter argument to that is people will say, well, but it's all in the intent and it's all in what it stands for. So when you pull out a Ouija board in a haunted place, the negative entities know that that's what it is. And so that's what they're going to come through. But also, like, if I pull out a Ouija board in Lizzie Borden's house, Lizzie Borden never saw The Exorcist. But she saw a Ouija board in her lifetime, and she knows what it's used for. So she knows that that's something that she can use to communicate with me, whereas opposed to, if I pull out a digital recorder or something like that, it's like, what's this little weird thing that they're putting out with the red light on it? So there is, a familiarity with the board that I think a lot of spirits in these historical places can associate with.
Yep. Have you do these conferences and lectures, but have you actually trained other people to be investigators or researchers?
It's funny because I always tell this story, and Joe Chin kills me every time I tell this story. He always gives me this look. But back in the early day, 2007, Kristen Gartland, who was on the original seasons of Ghost Hunters, and she was originally the case manager for TAPS. She was teaching a course at the TAPS headquarters in Rhode Island called Paranormal 101. And she said, will you come and help me with this class? I don't know how to teach, and I don't know what I'm doing. Will you just come and help me and kind of be my lifeline if I forget anything? I said, sure. Myself and Matt Moniz, one of my co-hosts, we go down there to help her out. And in that class, taking his very first ever Paranormal 101 was Joe Chin, who would go on to be part of Ghost Hunters and Ghost Hunters International. So I always make that joke whenever I'm around him, like, I taught Joe Chin how to hunt for ghosts. But that is kind of what we do is, we want to make things accessible for people. So a lot of my library lectures that I do are a Paranormal 101. Come on out, learn how to do this. We always have at all of our events people that are doing it for the first time. We also have a lot of people that are seasoned investigators. And what we've done is we've created a great community of people that understand that, there's some people who want to do it for, that have the experience and want to go off on their own. And there's other people that need to hold a hand throughout it. And so we always find a way to make everybody kind of come together. And we've had people that have come for their first ever ghost hunt with us on one of our events. And now they're part of, paranormal research teams that have branches across multiple states. So it's amazing how much that we've actually been able to kind of influence people in a way that we've never kind of taught them our way of doing things. We've always just kind of opened the door for them to try to figure out their own way and encourage them to do so.
That's cool. Yeah, it's nice to see how much influence you can give, and have that effect across so many people over time. It's a testament to that says you're doing it right.
We always say, and like, not to toot our own horn, but we always say, like, it's so weird, all the things that have come out of starting Spooky Southcoast 11 and a half years ago. That if this show hadn't happened, there's so many things that probably never would have happened. If this show never happened, then Aaron Cadju might never have made the Bridgewater Triangle documentary. In which case, I never would have gotten to meet Chris Jericho, which would have been the biggest heartbreak of my life. Just as a side note, we filmed the pilot together of investigating the Bridgewater Triangle, so it was like a dream come true for me because I'm a huge wrestling fan. But all these things, Legend Trips never would have come together. We never would have met Jeff Belanger. We never would have created Legend Trips. We never would have raised $30,000 to save these historic places. The tavern that is in my town from 1690 that we do events at, they don't make any money on tourism. Us putting a light on that has made that a paranormal go-to destination. The fort that we do in New Bedford, Massachusetts, that was on Ghost Hunters, that got world recognition when they struggled to even keep the lights on in the military museum there. All these good things, and not to mention the relationships, the friendships that have formed. It's almost like this is what we were supposed to do. And in the end, if we end up never proving anything to anybody about the paranormal, at least we've helped a whole bunch of people find where they feel like they belong.
Nice. Very nice. And you've got a couple of books you've written as well, right?
I have, yeah. I reluctantly wrote a couple of books. The first one is called Ghosts of the Southcoast, and it's about the ghosts that are in this area. And I had no intention of writing a book. because I write for a living. So I said, well, I certainly don't want to go spend all day writing and then go home and write more. Especially when, there's no immediate paycheck at the end of the day, like when you're writing news and writing sports. So I was very reluctant to want to do it. I actually said to Jeff Belanger, you should write a book about all the ghosts in this area. And he said, no, I shouldn't. You should. You're the one that lives there. And I said, all right, well, let me talk to Chris Balzano, who had written extensively about the Bridgewater Triangle. So I said to Chris, you should write a book about Ghosts of the South Coast. And he said, no, I shouldn't. You should. So after enough prodding, I finally sat down and in a marathon stretch of about 2 weeks, I wrote the entire book, only because I waited until the very end of till my deadline before I actually started writing it. But I put together Ghosts of the South Coast, and the readers love it. The history press that put it out was like, this is more about the history than it is the ghosts. I said, I know. That's what makes it so cool. No other place has this history. No other place can talk about how this town was founded when the settlers bought it from the Native Americans for 14 copper pots and a jacket. These are the cool parts about it. The ghosts are everywhere, but not every ghost comes from these stories. So I said, maybe this isn't the thing for me, and I decided not to write any more books. And then, a couple of years later, Chris Balzano calls me up and says, they want me to write a book about haunted objects. I want you to write it with me. So we teamed up on that. And for a while, we were known as the haunted objects guys, before Haunted Collector was on TV, and of course before Greg and Dana had the museum. So we filmed a pilot for a TV show, and people were always contacting us about, how can I send you my item? And so for a little while, we started going down that path, and we said, we don't want to end up with a whole basement full of haunted and cursed objects.
Yeah, I think it just takes a shingle somewhere in the world that says you're involved with the paranormal, and you'll get emails and letters saying, please take this thing from me.
And I do have a few things. I've taken in a few things. I have a piece of a gravestone from the 1600s that somebody stole and then sent to me. I got it through, a couple of different sources, but it caused problems to everybody that had it. So when I got it, I just put it in my shed. And I told Greg and Dana that eventually I'm going to get it to them the next time I see them. It's just too heavy to ship. And most recently, I was actually given a deck of haunted tarot cards that I gave to Greg and Dana that they've added to their museum. So now if anybody wants to give me anything, I'm just going to filter it to them. They're the ones who it belongs with. They're the ones that should be taking care of it. And I also think that if I give them enough things, maybe Billy will start to like me, because Billy and I don't get along right now.
I hear it takes chocolate, rum, cigarettes, and time with Ty. I don't know.
I mean, Ty gets along with him better than anybody. See, I fall more in the John Tenney camp. John Tenney and Billy hate each other. And they will literally swear at each other. It's hilarious. And Billy doesn't like me because Billy has a real big thing for my co-host and my friend Stephanie, who does Spooky Southcoast with me. She's a psychic medium, and her and Billy have that extra level of connection. And when she's around, Billy wants to be in her hands the entire time. And she's drawn to him. And it's weird. It's so weird how much they're connected with each other. And so when I'm around, I think Billy kind of sees me as a threat to that. So whenever I see him, I get like this weird itchy feeling on the back of my neck. And then like the top of my head starts to get real tingly, and like my neck will burn. And so that's how I know, like, when Billy's in the room. If he's wrapped up in the burlap, I'm fine. But as soon as they take the burlap off, I'm like, oh, what's that? Oh, I'm getting that sensation on the back of my neck again. And Greg cracks up every time it happens, but...
Yeah, Billy's an interesting case that they've got on their hands. You've dealt with haunted objects before. A lot of people did. I mean, have you ever encountered anything that evolved quite the way that Billy seems to?
I don't think I've ever had to deal with anything like that personally. The most haunted object I've ever had in my possession was a doll that I took in from a friend of mine to write about in Haunted Objects. I let this doll come into my house for a couple of months, and it would mess with the heat in my office. And this doll is actually going to make an appearance on this new television project with the Tennessee Wraith Chasers. That's all I can say. But the doll will be on TV. And that's probably the only time that I've ever really felt creeped out by an object until I met Billy.
So Billy did give you that kind of like creepy vibe then.
Yeah, Billy, it's almost like when you look at him, and I don't know if you've ever seen him in person, but when you're looking at him, his eyes are following you. And I know that no matter where I am in the room, he's staring at me because, he just wants to mess with me.
Now, I've not encountered Billy in person yet. The last time Greg and Dana came through the area, we met up for pizza. And I was looking through the objects that they had acquired after we all had dinner. They popped the trunk and they're like, oh, here, check this out. We've got this piece of the Amityville house and we've got this mirror. And, they were just looking at everything. They hadn't acquired yet the things that have sort of become the rock stars of their museum.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So I haven't made it to a conference and I haven't made it over to see them in a while. And, we haven't been around each other. And since they've acquired these really cool items.
Well, I'll tell you a funny story about Greg and Dana. And this goes back all the way to the very early days of Spooky Southcoast. I used to refer to them as, when they were running the Who Forwarded website, I used to refer to them as the TMZ of the paranormal because they were always, crapping on people. And, Greg will be the first one to tell you they were wrong and they've changed and all that. But I've known them for so many, probably 10 years now. And we only met in person for the first time a couple of months ago. After all these years of knowing each other, it took them coming to Provincetown, Massachusetts for the Provincetown Paracon for me to meet them the first time. And then 2 weeks later, I got to spend a whole week with them on Amy Bruni's Strange Escapes cruise. So it's funny because there's a woman who's involved who goes to a lot of Amy's events. We call her Mama Cheryl. I call her Mama Cheryl. And she's kind of adopted me as her paranormal son, and Stephanie as her paranormal daughter, and Ty, and Greg and Dana, and then Tenny. And so it's like we've become this like little paranormal family. And we've been saying for a while now that this group of people, for some reason, we are all supposed to be friends and all supposed to be together for a reason. And I think that this is, that there's going to be a shift here. There's going to be something going on here. And for some reason, I think that we're all being connected for some reason.
Well, I hope so. It's a great crew to have. I met, I go back to the Who Forwarded days with Greg and Dana. I wrote a couple articles for them. And
such a great site. I loved it.
Yeah. And my articles survived the cut and went to Week in Weird too. So I'm a little proud of that. Nice. And, I didn't actually meet them in person until they started filming for Planet Weird. They were doing all these different experiments, and I shot Greg an idea I had, and they came here and we filmed it and had a great time doing it. And one of these days, the world will see it.
the first time I saw that they were doing the Week in Weird site, I sent them a message saying, like, I really should send you a cease and desist order because we've been doing the Week in Weird as a segment on Spooky Southcoast since 2007, 2006, probably even the first year that we did the show. We do the weird news of the week and we always call it the Week in Weird. And I was like, you're basically stealing my intellectual property. And Greg's like, that I haven't listened to enough of your show to know that.
Yeah, there's only so many ways that we can all say paranormal, occult, weird.
Right. I was like, I'm less offended that you're stealing it and more offended that you didn't realize that I did it because you don't listen to my show.
Right. And ladies and gentlemen, this is how episode 10 leaks into episode 11. If you don't know who we're talking about, it's Dana and Greg Newkirk of the Traveling Museum of the Paranormal and Occult, not the court. Go back to episode 10 and get to meet them.
And I recommend it to anybody. I mean, seriously, just getting to hear them tell their stories. And they're both such wonderful people. I mean, really, that's what's great about them is they love what they do. They're not doing it because it's a gimmick for them. They're not doing it because it's their way to make their way in the paranormal world. They're doing it because this is what they were called to do, and they love every minute of it. And they're just two of the greatest people on earth, really.
Yep, I'll second that. So going back to you, if you were to give advice to anyone out there who's got to get into the paranormal waters all on their own, no network of friends around, no community, nobody teaching workshops or anything nearby. They don't have you. what should they be doing? What would you tell them?
Step one is to read a book. Go to the library, get some of the books that are written by guys like Hans Holzer, Brad Steiger. Go and read what they were doing. Read how paranormal investigation came to be. Learn the history of it. You never start watching it, in these days of binge watching TV shows. You don't start watching a show at episode 47. You start all the way at episode 1 and you work your way through the entire series. And to do that with the paranormal, go back and see how people were investigating before and how it's come to what it is. So that's the first thing that you have to do. You have to know what it is that you're doing. And also the other thing that I would recommend is shadow people. Not shadow people like that you encounter. I mean, like shadow other investigators. Follow them on investigations. But don't align yourself with one particular mindset of doing things. Go and learn from different people. Ideally, if you can find a local group that has different approaches, that's great. But a lot of groups have a group mindset that they all have to follow. But go and learn and see how different people do different things and incorporate all of that into what you do. Michael Jordan is Michael Jordan because he was born to be Michael Jordan. But at the same time, he also watched how other people played the game, and he picked things up from other people's games, and he'll be the first one to tell you that, I learned this move from watching this guy, and I learned this move from watching this guy. So you can pick up all of that too. You can learn different approaches and different techniques from working with different people. And the best part about that, the absolute best part about working with other people is you get to try all their equipment before you shell out the money for it.
Yeah, I mean, it's nice to play with other people's toys before you go spending money on these things.
Just don't break them.
No, don't break them. I couldn't agree more. Well, we're coming towards the end of this episode, and for any of the subscribers and members of the Weird Web Radio Club, you're going to get bonus audio that comes a little bit after this. Do you have any parting thoughts that you'd like to share?
Why am I dying?
Are you dying?
I hope not. Well, we all are. What's the worst part about being born? Hey, as soon as you're born, you start dying. But I mean, if I can leave people with one idea about the paranormal, it's one. I'd say two things. One, be open. Don't have a closed off mindset. Don't ever think that the way you do it is right and the way somebody else does it is wrong. Outside of course, obeying the law and not scamming people, but be open-minded in your approach, be open-minded in your experiences, and make sure that you're not ever closing yourself off to the possibility of having an experience. And then the other thing that I would tell people is, as paranormal researchers, as investigators, you do not understand, well, some people do not understand the role that you have in keeping history alive. It's your job to be the historians of this modern age, because history just isn't cool for people anymore for some reason. You need to keep history cool. You need to keep people interested and engaged. So make sure that you have the facts right. Make sure that you have the story, and make sure that you are telling that story.
I dig it. I agree. You keep the history alive and just don't be so sure of yourselves. That's great advice. Tim, I can't thank you enough for being here. Where can everyone find you?
The easiest place to find me is to go to SpookySouthcoast.com. That's where you can watch our show. We're on live Saturday nights from 10 to midnight Eastern Time. We have our own app for Android and iPhone where you can watch the show. We do this thing where we have webcams in the studio while we're on the radio, so you get basically a television show of us doing the radio show. So you can watch that live. You can chat and interact there. You can find all of our old podcasts and videos going back all the way to the beginning. And then the other way people can find me is just follow me on social media at Tim Weisberg, pretty much everywhere where you can find social media. The only problem with that is there's a guy who plays the flute from the 70s who's like more famous than I am. So if you go to timweisberg.com, that's his site. If you see a flute, that's not me. If you see a ghost or a graveyard, that's probably me.
That poor guy probably goes around going, there's another Tim Weisberg who hunts ghosts.
We used to get each other's emails, and I would say, hey, I get these emails from people that say, I saw you in 1974 at the Monterey Jazz Festival, and I really enjoyed your set. And what was that song you played? I can only imagine what his emails must say. Dear Tim, I have a demon in my basement. How do I get rid of it?
It would be fair to let you go before I tell you this story, since you've brought up wrestling more than once and how much you loved it. I work in a bar here in town, and it's a haunted bar appropriately.
Nice.
And one day we have a local wrestling show coming through. It's going to perform in one of the old local high school gymnasiums. And the wrestlers all come to my bar to drink afterwards. And amongst the crowd of gigantic human beings was none other than King Kong Bundy.
Oh.
Yeah. And this dude was enormous.
I got to see him wrestle at my high school football field in the 90s, and he was definitely a very large man. But from everybody that knew him, they said he was one of the nicest guys in the world.
He was an extreme gentleman. It was almost disturbing how kind he was. We had to open up 2 doors for him to get in. And at the time, I was just a bouncer. This is back in late 98, early 99. And I'm checking IDs, and as people come through, I just turn to look at the next guy and realize both doors are open, and I'm staring directly into this massive chest.
Just be thankful that Andre the Giant didn't come to drink in your bar. That guy would drink like 60 beers in a sitting.
Oh my goodness. We weren't struggling back in the 90s. It would have been fine. Do we need guys like that today?
That's true. Yeah, it would be good. It'd be good for business, but not so good when when he ends up challenging other people to see if they can keep up with him.
That's right. All right. Well, Tim, thank you again for being here. Everyone out there, please go find Tim and check out his show, check out his sites, and if you're in the New England area, check out his talks and his conferences. Stay weird out there, my friends. Okay, gang, that's a wrap on this episode of Weird Web Radio. Once again, thank you all for listening. Now, it's time for you to go join the official Weird Web Radio membership. Go to patreon.com/weirdwebradio and you can choose your rewards and become a member today. Enjoy all the exclusive benefits, inside information, and plenty of bonus audio with each guest. Now, you can find the show at weirdwebradio.com and weirdwebradio.libsyn.com. The show is listed on Facebook and Twitter as Weird Web Radio, and you can find me on Instagram as just Lonnie_Scott. Please remember to rate and comment and share the shows that you like, and it helps others find us in all the search results. Shoot me an email if you want to be a guest on the show, or if you know someone that would be a great guest in upcoming episodes. You can send that to weirdwebradio@gmail.com. Seek the mysteries and delights in life, my friends. As always, stay weird out there.